welcome to the second part of the video presentation for Chapter 1. In the last segment, Dr. Marin discussed capitalistic systems and what makes them. In this segment, I'd like to describe some of the economic measures that we use to determine the performances of those economies. On an individual level, we can look at the productivity, or the average output per worker per hour. However, on a more macroeconomic scale, we can look at what is called the gross domestic product, or GDP. The GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced by all people within a given country in 1 year's time. We can also look at the inflation and deflation of prices. So inflation is the phenomena when prices uniformly increase within an economy. And deflation is the opposite, where prices uniformly decrease. Some other very important economic indicators are the unemployment rate, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, and the Producer Price Index, or the PPI. Full employment within an economy is very important for the health of the economy. Without employed people, the economy cannot run because there's no one to purchase goods. So, for a healthy economy, a 3 to 4% unemployment rate is what is considered normal and healthy. The Consumer Price Index is a monthly index that measures the change of prices of a fixed basket of goods purchased by typical urban consumers. And the PPI is an index that measures the prices that producers receive for their finished goods. Now you might be wondering, who calculates these numbers and where can I get them? Well, every country has a Bureau of Labor Statistics which calculates these numbers either on a monthly, a quarterly, or an annual basis. Another set of common measures used to evaluate a nation's economic health is balance of trade, bank credit, and corporate profits. A country is said to have a positive balance of trade if a country exports more than it imports. However, on the other hand, if a country imports more than it exports, it's said to have a negative balance of trade. Bank credit, on the other hand, is a measure of the lending activity of commercial financial institutions in a country. This statistic is important because it allows one to see how well these financial institutions are being able to work within a society. Corporate profits, on the other hand, are the total amount of profits made by corporations over selected time periods. Some other things we can look at are the inflation rate and the national income. So the inflation rate is an economic statistic that tracks the increase of prices in goods and services over a period of time. So overall, we can see that the price of any given good has increased over a specific amount of time. But what's the rate of change? That's what the inflation rate tells you. The national income, on the other hand, is a calculation of the total income earned by various segments of the population, including employers and several other entities within the economy. Some other very good metrics to see the health of an economy is the number of houses being built and the prime interest rate. This is because when people feel secure about their job and when there's enough employment, people will demand houses. However, in times in which there's insecurity about one's job, people do not consider purchasing new houses. And for the prime interest rate, this is very important because interest rates reflect a bank trying to avoid risk. And so if the interest rates are high, this means that banks feel that there's a high risk they will not receive the money back that they're loaning. However, when the interest rates are low, that means that they have a high confidence that they're going to receive the money back. So again, these are very good indicators of whether the economy is healthy or not. From a macroeconomic perspective, there's something called the business cycle. The business cycle is a relationship between the GDP and time. So as time goes on, the GDP is thought to increase linearly. However, this is not the case. GDP actually goes through cycles of growth, recession, and depression. So periods of growth is when the GDP is increasing relative to past GDPs. A peak occurs when that growth flattens off. And a recession is a period of 2 or more months in which the GDP is decreasing. And a depression is when there is either a bottoming out of the GDP or just a complete lack of growth of the GDP. A depression can be very difficult on an economy and very difficult on the people living in an economy, and is not easy to be seen except for in retrospect. When you're in a depression, one can think that it's a recession. However, it's only in retrospect, looking back in time, that you can know that it was a depression rather than a recession. Now, when we look at government policy, there's two different controls, you might say. One, there's monetary policy, and then there's fiscal policy. These are just different ways of trying to control the economy, different ways of trying to stabilize these oscillations between growth periods and recession periods. So monetary policy uses interest rates and the supply of money in the economy to try to avoid recessions and avoid hyperinflation. Fiscal policy, on the other hand, is trying to collect taxes and also controlling spending so that, again, the growth of the economy can be regulated. You'll learn more about this in your macroeconomics classes. You might wonder, who does this? In each country, there is a banking system or a Federal Reserve. In the US, the leader of that Federal Reserve at this current time is Janet Yellen. Now let's turn our attention to a more microeconomic concept, the concept of supply and demand. The demand curve is a relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded of a particular good. Likewise, the supply curve is a relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied of a good. Where these two curves intersect is what is called the equilibrium or market price. This is the price that people are willing to pay in the market for a particular good based on the demand and the supply of that good. Although these curves may look simple, don't underestimate their value. There is a lot of information contained in them, and a whole semester of microeconomics will teach you how to fully use them to analyze markets and also to understand better how supply and demand and how prices are set within the market economy. For now, the key takeaway should be that the demand curve is an inverse relationship between the quantity demanded and the price of that good. This means that as the price of a good goes up, less quantity will be demanded. Likewise, the supply curve is a coverse relationship, which means that as the price of a good goes up in the market, more of that good will be supplied by suppliers. In a free market economy, different types of competition can arise. This is based upon the market conditions and also based upon the demand for a particular good. In Adam Smith's vision of capitalism, he envisioned a system in which the government did not intervene through laissez-faire. And he envisioned an economy in which the invisible hand of self-interest drove people to try to become producers of a particular good, and that would encourage competition. And through that competition, the price would be maintained at a level which would allow all members in society to be able to benefit from that economy. So we can see that the ideal of capitalism that Adam Smith envisioned is one of perfect competition, one in which there are no barriers to entry and there's no product differentiation. And as a result, an infinite number of firms could be producing a particular product, and this would drive the price lower, allowing all people in the economy to be able to enjoy the benefits of the economy. Examples of this exist still today in products such as commodities such as steel, oil, coffee, and rice. However, it is not idealistic for firms because they cannot make profits, and even to the consumer it can cause problems because from not being able to make profits, companies may not reinvest in research and development, and as a result, the products may not be of the best quality. So as a result, firms and consumers push more towards monopolistic competition. In monopolistic competition, there are a little bit more barriers to entry and products are differentiated. As a result, there are still a lot of firms, but not an infinite number of firms. An example of this would be small restaurants. So for instance, if we think about McDonald's or Burger King, they take a good they take several goods which are commodities, and they add value to those products to differentiate them so that you have what you might think is a better product, and at the same time they're able to make more profit because they're able to demand a higher price. However, in some industries, the barriers to entry are very high, and in some cases, companies are trying to seek out more profits. And as a result, you get industries like the banking industry and also the chip making industry in which there are few companies producing these products. As an example, there are few banks in any given location because the amount of money you need to be able to start a bank and also the regulations you have to face as a bank lead to high barriers to entry for that industry. Now, the final type of competition is a monopoly. A monopoly is when there's only one producer. And in this case, this might occur because there's some product which is very unique and can't be reproduced in some way, or it might be because the industry itself is creating very high barriers to entry. An example of a famous monopoly was Standard Oil, which was a company produced by John D. Rockefeller. This company chose to buy out all of its competition and make it extremely difficult for anyone else to be able to enter the market. And as a result, it was able to control completely the oil market at the turn of the 19th century. As a result, regulators have tried to make regulations which stop monopolies and oligopolies from coming into place. And the ideal these days is considered to be monopolistic competition. One other thing that you should pay attention to is the fact that under perfect competition, the firms are price takers. This means that they have to take the price that the economy yields, whereas in the case of a monopoly, they are price setters. They set the price that the economy has to pay for the goods. In this last slide, I would just like to highlight the segmentation of the current business environment. At its most basic level, at the level that we feel most impacted by, is the internal environment where we, the employees, and the different business units we work in and the unions we join exist. Here we feel a daily impact, and it's very concrete, those impacts on us. However, there's also the micro environment. And in this sphere, you have the suppliers and the consumers, and it is a very important level, but we don't feel so directly impacted by it. And then at the furthest level out, you have the macro environment. And the macro environment involves the laws, the regulations, the politics, and the culture of the economy. Although we don't feel these so directly impacting our lives, a small change, for instance, in the GDP, is not something that we directly feel immediately. It is something that overall affects our quality of life. I hope that this discussion motivates you to read the chapter well, so that you can come to the class prepared to discuss with your classmates and with Dr. Medin these very impactful and important topics. Thank you for listening to my presentation.